Okay.
All right, we're going.
Well, welcome everybody to virtual Aptos history. This used to be coffee, tea, and history, so you're now required to provide your own snacks. There are so many amazing stories in Aptos. Aptos is such an amazing place, but with a great history. And so we have a wonderful presentation today, teeing it up in Aptos, the history of the Seascape Rio Del Mar Golf Club, which is one of the wonderful historical structures that we still have in town. We're John and Karen Hibble from the Aptos History Museum, and a little information about watching the show today. You're muted. You can turn off your video or leave it on. It doesn't really matter. If you want to ask questions, there's a chat function you'll see. If you move your cursor to the bottom of the screen, you can type out questions, and Heidi can bring those up, or we can wait till the end and you can unmute yourself and ask questions. You may experience some slowdown because of your Wi-Fi connections or our Wi-Fi connections. It's just some of the great Wi-Fi services that we have here in Aptos. And if you want to see just the presentation, up in the upper right-hand corner, there's a speaker's view. You want to click that instead of have the gallery view. We'd like to thank all of you for helping to keep the museum alive, because these presentations are one way that we can raise money when we're not allowed to have any kinds of get-togethers. So we're funded through memberships and these presentations. So if you're not a member, we'd love it if you'd think about joining. We have one other fundraiser that's available, and it's coming really quickly. And those are memorial bricks to be put into the Aptos Village, the new Aptos Village green. So if you're interested in maybe having a commemorative brick for any reason, please contact us at the chamber at 688-1467, and we'd be happy to help you get a brick. So today's presenters are the team of Dick and Heidi Garwood, and they really are a team. Dick and Heidi have been with the museum from before we opened in our current location, and they helped set it up. They helped design some of the displays. Dick helped make some of the displays. Heidi does all the graphics for us. They're super talented people. They're on the steering committee. They do a lot of the research, but they live on a historical parcel where the man of Seacliff shot the sheriff, and he also killed the deputy. That's another story that Dick and Heidi might bring to us. So without further ado, let's get started on our presentation.
Okay, so you want to?
Do you want to say something first?
Okay, well, yeah, I'm Dick. This is obviously Heidi, and as John said, I've been involved with the museum at the museum since day one, and probably something that makes me, besides being interested in history, something that makes me a little more interested and qualified to do this presentation is that I have played at our golf course many times over the years, going back probably 30 years, something like that. So I'm really happy to be able to do this. Let's go ahead and go to the slide.
Okay.
The first slide.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to move those off to the left. Okay, so as John said, thank you very much for joining us for this Zoom presentation. And as he also said, your support is crucial for the museum's continuing existence. We really do look forward to when we can resume the live presentations that we've enjoyed in the past. As John said, we've recently been doing coffee, tea, and history, and before that we were doing dining for history. So keep your fingers crossed that we'll be able to start some of those things again. And much of this information that I'm going to be presenting is from a book that was written by Alan Collins. And Alan retired to Rio Del Mar in 1973 after 36 years as an engineer with Shell Oil. He described himself as an amateur historian, but he was a meticulous researcher who went to great lengths to get it right. He sought out original deeds and maps, and he personally interviewed and or corresponded with the people involved whenever possible. His book is called Rio Del Mar, a Sedate Residential Community. And it can be purchased at the museums still. It's really an invaluable little book. I think it's $25. It's kind of a mimeograph copy type of a book, but it's really, really well worth it. And I highly recommend that you get that book if you're interested in the history of Rio Del Mar, which goes into a lot of the historical things way back, going to the discovery in the Mexican era and a lot of other aspects besides the golf course. So I never did have the opportunity to meet Mr. Collins because he did pass away in 1995 at the age of 80, but I wish I had had a chance to meet him and thank him for writing that book. So let's begin. I'm going to start our story during the period of the Mexican rule in California. There is a great deal of fascinating history that occurred prior to this time that could easily fill a number of additional presentations, but in the interest of time, we're going to start here. We're not going to start in Genesis or anything like that. So during the Mexican rule, Don Rafael Castro, and I believe the word Don in that era meant gentleman. So Don Rafael Castro was the first owner of the land that was in and around what we now know as Aptos. In 1833, Mexican Governor Jose Figueroa granted him 6,680 acres for meritorious military service. And this acreage ran from today's Cabrillo College almost to La Selva Beach, and from the shoreline to about 2 or 3 miles inland. Now, over time, Raphael sold some of his land, and he also gifted other acreage to his children. But in 1872, there were 2,390 acres left that was called Aptos Rancho, and Claus Spreckles bought that from Don Rafael Castro for about $81,000. This land today is today's Rio Del Mar, Seascape in the area north of Highway 1, up Aptos Creek, Cathedral Drive, Trout Gulch, and Valencia Creek. Okay, I'm trying to shift to the next slide.
Okay.
There we go. This photo shows the main entrance of the Aptos Ranch. It was called the Aptos Rancho during Don Rafael Castro's times, but when Spreckles bought it, I guess they Americanized the name. And this ranch was composed of a vast array of barnyards and corrals, bunkhouses, equipment sheds, and stables. I think this is a great photo. I didn't actually count these, but it says there were 23 ranch hands and 19 horses in this photo. It's where this photo is the location of today's Redwood Village, which would have been off to the left in the photo. In 1908, Claus Spreckles died, and his heirs formed the San Cristina Investment Company in 1909. And it continued to operate the Aptos Ranch for another 14 years and produced needed products before, during, and after World War I, primarily livestock, field crops, and in 1922, the history of the golf course in Rio Del Mar really begins. Fred and Phoebe Summers came along and purchased the 2,390-acre Aptos Ranch from the San Cristina Investment Company for $220,000. Now, Fred Summers was a prominent and successful land merchant in the booming Los Angeles real estate market, and his intention was to subdivide into many residential lots and to build a golf course and country club as an attraction. 2 years after buying Aptos Ranch, in 1924, the Summers formed the Aptos Company, which was a combine of mostly Southern California investors. A year later, in 1925, the Aptos Company was sold to Leo Monroe, William Lyon, and Lawrence Miller, and Joseph Greenberg, who were active in real estate development in Los Altos and Belmont, doing business as Monroe, Lyon, Miller of San Francisco. I'm not sure why Greenberg's name was dropped off all the time there, but I think he was involved at least in the early years. The intent was for Monroe, Lyon, and Miller to own and manage all the Aptos properties, which was known then as Aptos by the Sea. And just to jump ahead a few years and complete this aspect of the story, the Aptos Company became the Peninsula Properties Company in 1927. Fred Summers died in 1928. And interestingly, at least I think, he and Phoebe never established a permanent home here. Okay, back to 1925. This is a map that shows the golf course and many of the streets and the properties laid out around it. And this map I took from a photo. It hangs still on the wall of the small banquet room behind the pro shop at the golf course. If you know where the pro shop is and you look down that little hallway between the pro shop and the fireplace, there's a little banquet room there, and this map is on the wall. The map is titled the Aptos Beach Country Club Properties Subdivision 1. You probably can't read that. And it formed, on paper at least, the first subdivision on our area. And it preserved the space for the golf course and 584 residential lots. Still called the Aptos Company, but run in reality by Monroe, Lyon, and Miller, they laid out and named many of the streets that remain today. Some of the streets I'll name clearly show Summers' influence, such as Clubhouse Drive, which was picked by Summers as the entry to his golf course. And Murray Avenue, Dorsey Avenue, and Humes Avenue were named after original investors, so I think Summers had a hand in that. Aptos Beach Drive, which was formerly Bush Road, later became Rio Del Mar Boulevard. But other streets were clearly named by Monroe, Lyon, and Miller. For example, Los Altos Drive was a salute to the Los Altos Country Club developed by Monroe, Lyon, and Miller in Greenberg. Belmonte Drive and Belmonte Court acknowledge the Belmonte Golf Club in Belmont, also built by Monroe, Lyon, Miller, and Greenberg. That club no longer exists, and the land was subdivided. Ewell Avenue and Ewell Court were named after William Lyon's son. Semple Avenue was named after J.K. Semple, who was the secretary of the Aptos Company in 1924. So that was probably a holdover from Summers' influence of the naming of the streets. Sumner Drive was named after Maurice H. Sumner, who was vice president of the Methodist Conference Association in San Francisco, who was then negotiating the purchase of the Monty Toyon Conference Ground up on today's Cathedral Drive. Wixon Drive was named for Marjorie Wixon. She was the lead secretary of Monroe, Lyon, and Miller in San Francisco. And today the street name is spelled W-I-X-O-N, which is actually a misspelling of her name, which was W-I-X-S-O-N. Palmer Avenue was named, and not after Arnold, as you might think, but for Elva Palmer Lyon, who was the wife of Monroe, Lyon, and Miller's William Lyon. Okay, the golf course was laid out and designed by Willie Locke, and you can see the holes are all laid out there on that original map from 1925. Now, Willie Locke, supposedly they say he invented the 9-iron. I'm not sure how you exactly invent a 9-iron. I think you just take an 8-iron and bend it a little bit. But he was employed by the Los Altos Country Club, and he also designed the Lake Merced Golf Club in Daly City in 1922. And he had designed the California Golf Club in 1918, the Lake Chabot Muni in Oakland in 1920, and King's Country Club in Hanford also in 1920. Now, Willie Locke was a professional golfer, and he played in the 1921 National Open Championship at Columbia Country Club in Washington State, where a huge field of 232 players included Walter Hagen and Bobby Jones, two famous names from the early days of golf. And Locke Drive runs in front of the golf course today. It's kind of that horseshoe-shaped a street that enters into the golf course and then comes out half a block around the corner. So opened in the late fall of 1925, the golf course featured an underground water system to allow watering at night. The front nine was the western side, much as it is today, but most of the holes played much longer. Now, as a golfer, as a not a very good golfer, this really amazes me. Today's number one hole plays 369s from the back tees. But in 1925, it was 425 yards and was described on the scorecard as easy for a starter. Now, I don't know how many of you play golf, but I don't think a 425-yard par 4 is exactly easy for a starter. Hole number 6 plays 207 yards today from the back tees, but in 1925 it was 235 yards. Today's front 9 totals 3,002 yards, but in 1925 description, it adds up to 3,245 yards. So again, the course played a lot longer back then with that, and here we are today playing it much shorter with all this modern equipment and modern golf balls and all that stuff. So the back 9 was originally laid out in the eastern side as it is today, but the holes were quite different then. And it was then a par 37. Okay, here's a great aerial view from about 1927. Now, before, there were virtually no trees in this area. As many of you know from John Hibble's presentations over the years, the Native Americans, the Ohlone Indians, burned the coastal plain every year to provide pasture for deer and other game animals to graze. So there were no trees. I'll say more about the trees here again in a minute. And this is a great photo for a number of reasons. You might be able to, is that
Sorry,
show?
yeah.
You might be able to make out the railroad trestle in the background spanning Bush Gulch, which is where today's trail goes down to Hidden Beach. You can also see the tennis courts there in the lower left corner, and there are a couple of rental cabins that are visible. In the original layout, the first hole goes off to the right of the golf lodge as it does today. And the 10th hole then ran up the left center of the photo toward the left side of the railroad trestle. And that's the 18th hole coming back up the little valley, which today is the 10th hole that plays now in the opposite direction. So you can think of driving or walking from the clubhouse area over to the left there where the 10th tee is, and then that goes down that valley that you certainly would recognize as you play. I know I often slice my ball up to the right side there and just hope that the hillside brings that ball down somewhere where I can find it. So at some point, by the way, probably around 1936, the 9s were switched, but in about 1998, the 9s were switched back. Now here are a couple more great shots of the golf course. I've got to get to that. Okay, look at this panoramic view from, again, around 1927. And then here's an aerial view from also around that same time. Obviously, that's an airplane wing strut in the foreground there that you can see. And here's the 5th hole from around that same time, 1927. The trees look a little bit bigger to me, but this photo is from a brochure from that time. And you might not be able to read that caption because it's a little bit small, but for you, it says, Rio Del Mar is played over a championship 6,500 yard, 72 par course, every hole overlooking Monterey Bay. The above view of the 5th hole gives an idea of the diversified shots offered on the links. Splendid all grass fairways and greens all the year round. Nature did no better setting for a golf course. I think we would all agree that that's true. In fact, I don't know why we're all sitting around here on this beautiful day watching this presentation. We should be out playing golf. So let's talk a little bit more about the trees, because you might be asking, so then where did all those little trees come from? Well, over 4,000 Monterey pine and cypress trees were planted on the golf course and on the streets of the new residential development that was being developed by Monroe, Lyon and Miller. And the landscape designer was a man named Luigi Duarte. And he worked for Monroe, Lyon and Miller when he landscaped the Belmont and the Los Altos country clubs for them. Now he grew these seed at a nursery he created along Huntington Drive. Now at this point, I want to bit and relate an amazing true story regarding Luigi and the planting of all these trees. I think you're going to agree that this story tells of an incredible coincidence. So when Luigi was doing all this landscaping work on the golf course and around the new residential development, he was the house guest of a local family, the Fambrinis. A 10-year-old boy in that family, Marvin Fambrini, was invited by Luigi to plant a memorial tree on the golf course. The tree was a 4-foot tall cypress, and it was planted right in the middle of the 15th fairway. Those of you who played here back in the day, when it was the 6th hole then, will remember what grew to be probably at least 100-foot tall tree, which was notable not only because it often interfered with your second shot to the green, but also because there was a golf hole flagstick and a flag placed at the very top. I do. I actually, I was racking my brain trying to remember where I met a guy, but I was telling somebody about that story. He told me he was a tree climbing kind of a guy, tree worker guy, and he was the one that actually put that flagstick and golf hole flag up at the top of that tree. I wish I had maintained contact with him. But back to the story of Marvin. He grew up in Aptos and he played golf here. In fact, he caddied here as a boy for 75 cents a round. Now, let's fast forward to 1996. 1996, when Marvin, now 79 years old and still an avid golfer, was playing on the golf course one day. Just as he reached the tee for that sixth hole, the course marshals and workers halted play for a few. Old tree could be dropped to the ground. Now, wait for it. It was the very tree that Marvin had planted as a 10-year-old boy some 69 years before. Amazing. So continuing about the trees, here's an aerial view from around 1950, in the 1950s, which is a view from the opposite direction as that previous slide, but it really shows how these trees had grown. You can still see the tennis courts, and you can see quite a number of houses that had been built out into Rio Del Mar. So the golf course, the golf lodge itself on the golf course was completed right around the same time as the golf course was originally built, 1925 to 1926. It was known as the Aptos Beach Country Club and Lodge. And it initially served as the clubhouse for the country club, and it actually was a lodge. Guests and potential real estate customers were accommodated above the main room. Those rooms remain today, but they're not open to the public, but are used as office space and storage space. By 1926, the names Aptos Beach Country Club and Aptos by the Sea were being phased out in favor of a supposedly swankier name, Rio Del Mar. And Rio Del Mar was a made-up name. So now the golf course and the associated facilities were called the Rio Del Mar Country. Here's a slide that shows a membership card. It's an honorary lifetime membership card for Dr. Samuel William Hussey that confers, and I quote directly from the card, unlimited privileges of its clubhouse, golf course, polo and riding stables, bathing and other recreational facilities at Rio Del Mar, Santa Cruz County, California. And here's a photo of a membership certificate for Edna M. Beck and Bernice M. Marsh. So obviously the old saw that GOLF, G-O-L-F, was an acronym for Gentlemen Only, Ladies Forbidden, was not true for this newly minted country club. In fact, here's Mary Pickford, the famous movie star, playing golf here, probably in the late 1920s. And I'm just basing that guess on those recently planted small trees. And she was probably in her mid-30s at that time. You movie buffs probably remember that she was married to Douglas Fairbanks from 1920 to 1936, and they must have been quite the power couple. And further, I'd like to point out that women have been very involved in golf on the Monterey Bay area. Marion Hollins, who was a championship golfer, developed the Cypress Point Country Club as well as the Pasatiempo Golf Club. And you know that the Hollins House is a restaurant there at Pasatiempo. And I recently learned from John Hibble that there was a Rio Del Mar Ladies Golf Club. And in the 1930s, a program was set up to entertain children on the beach each Thursday from 10 in the morning till 2:30 in the afternoon so that their mothers would be able to play golf. So again, not gentlemen only, ladies forbidden. Actually, I always heard that the name the game itself was called golf, because all the other four-letter words were taken. In 1929, the Peninsula Properties Company built its office at the intersection of Coast Road and Aptos Beach Drive, which is today's Soquel Drive and Rio Del Mar Boulevard. And that building was torn down in 1966 to accommodate the Rio Del Mar interchange, which was put up to help prevent the many serious accidents that had been occurring at that intersection. Across that intersection on the south side, a grand entrance to the Rio Del Mar Country Club was built. It spanned Aptos Beach Drive and was a 125-foot wide, 40-foot tall structure. It was torn down in 1948 to accommodate the freeway. That's really wish we still had that. Those circular, right way off to the left and off to the right, those kind of curved metal signs that say Rio Del Mar, we actually have one of those in our museum as well. If you haven't seen it, it's well worth seeing. I'm not sure exactly how we got a hold of that, but it's wonderful that we do have it. So here's the Hotel Don Rafael de Castro from around 1929. And this was built atop the ridge overlooking the ocean. Now the hotel became the clubhouse for the country club just in time for the Great Depression. Now skipping ahead a bit to 1935, with the repeal of Prohibition and an improving economy, the Hotel Don Rafael de Castro was greatly enlarged and it became the Rio Del Mar Country Club Inn. And here it is enlarged and shown in around 1936. And you can see the Sea Breeze building there in the foreground in the lower left, which unfortunately burned, as you know, last year. And we're not sure exactly what's going to happen to it. I think John is trying, working with the new owners to see if they can build it to somehow retain some of the old style there. But that's really something there, seeing all those old cars and the houses down on Beach Drive and that grand hotel up on the cliff there overlooking there. So that hotel, it was lavish. It had an ultra-modern kitchen and notably big bands broadcast on the radio from the famous Desert Room. The Golf Lodge was also that means the Golf Lodge on the golf course was also refurbished at this time. And they added a tap room, a card room, and additional space for the golf pro. The refurbished Golf Lodge featured a new cast iron and wrought iron fixtures and lamps that were made by famous Santa Cruz artist Otar the lamp maker. Otar did work on the inn as well, and a large cast iron screen from the inn we have on display at the museum. Again, another artifact that's well worth seeing. This slide shows the brochure for Rio Del Mar Country Club from around 1936. And the rendering shows that the golf course nines were reversed by this time, and the inn is referred to as the clubhouse, and the building on the golf course is called the Golf Lodge. Now the brochure also shows where a private airport would be for club members. It was on the bluff between Cliff Drive and Bayview Drive, just west of today's Hidden Beach. On this, it's probably pretty much right above the word Rio on that flag there, right along the bluff there. An interesting story about someone with a history in Rio Del Mar goes like this. Many of you may have heard of Douglas Wrong Way Corrigan, and he actually worked and operated for a time from our little airport. But much more famously, however, he worked as an aircraft mechanic and helped build Charles Lindbergh's Spirit of St. Louis, which made its famous transatlantic flight in 1927. Inspired by Lindbergh, Douglas Corrigan applied to the federal government many times for permission to make his own transatlantic flight, but he was denied permission every time. Officials believed his aircraft was not sound enough, even after Corrigan made a number of modifications. The government was very particular about who they would allow to do these kinds of trips, because they were wanting the reputation to really be, the reputation for air travel and airplanes to, develop a reputation for safety and success. But going back to Corrigan, in 1938, he flew cross country from Long Beach, California to Brooklyn, New York. On his return flight back to California, he claimed that he got turned around in the clouds and then followed the wrong end of the compass needle until he realized he was way out over the Atlantic Ocean. He landed in Dublin, Ireland after his more than 28-hour flight. An interesting little sidelight there. During the flight, he felt his feet go cold because a leaking gas tank had filled the cabin floor with gasoline. With a screwdriver, he punched a hole in the cabin floor in a location so as to let the gasoline drain out of the cabin and away from the hot engine exhaust pipe. Maybe the government had been right about the soundness of his aircraft, or lack thereof. As punishment, his pilot's license was suspended for just a few days, but he returned to America as a much beloved hero. His ticker tape parade in New York had over 1 million people lining Broadway Street. More people than Lindbergh had when he was honored with a ticker tape parade as well. Corrigan never publicly admitted his quote unquote error. He never admitted that it was intentional, but of course it is generally recognized that he did this just to get past the red tape, and maybe even more importantly, just to stick it to the government. I remember as a kid reading a book about Douglas Wrongway Corrigan. My dad was a private pilot, and I remember reading about Douglas Wrongway Corrigan, and my dad thought that that was a great story. Okay, back to the golf course in 1936. This was called the Bridge of Sighs from the brochure. It shows a long footbridge that went from the original second tee across the ravine to about where today's 17th fairway approaches the 17th green. The brochure says this bridge saves many steps if your tee shot carries the hazard. There was also a shorter footbridge across the little valley at today's par 3 8th hole, which was then the 17th. On the drawn map, it looks like today's 18th hole was the original first hole, and today's 10th was the original 9th, with both holes playing in the opposite direction. Okay, here's a photo of the Beach Club. The famous Beach Club was built in 1936 at the end of Beach Drive. It was ultra modern and high fashion and featured a glassed-in semicircular lounge, as well as lockers, showers, and dressing rooms, and a large landscape patio. It was very popular until the United States went to war with Japan on December 8, 1941. Now, to quote our historian Alan Collins, as World War II began, things went to hell in Rio del Mar. The golf course was decommissioned from 1942 to 1957. During the war years, it became a vegetable garden planted mostly in corn. The lodge became a rooming house for the Army officers who were stationed, some of whom were stationed at Camp McQuaid, which was in Capitola, and also some officers who were stationed at Fort Ord. In 1944, the Rio del Mar Country Club offered its assets for $200,000. This included the inn, also known as the main clubhouse, the beach club, the golf lodge, and all related grounds, facilities, furnishings, equipment, and machinery. An investment group was formed, but it was not able to complete a deal. In 1946, just 2 years later, another investor group negotiated a 5-year lease for the then idle hotel and beach club, but not the golf course or golf lodge. The Rio del Mar Hotel and Beach Club reopened to the public. And interestingly, this time it was not as a private club. It was a public facility. But the golf course and the lodge remained closed because they were still both owned by the Peninsula Properties, along with all the other properties in the subdivision. Another interesting side note is that in 1947, the golf lodge was offered for use as a school for the Aptos School District. I'm not sure whether they ever took up that offer, but it's known that that offer was made. The beach club operated again for only that one summer and then closed down permanently. It became part of Seacliff State Beach in 1955, and most of the building was dismantled. The remainder, which had remained as a shabby locker room and restroom facility, was torn down in 1966. Here's the Rio del Mar Country Club in the 1940s, and here it is in 1947. Again, I love seeing all those old cars. But, you know, the Rio del Mar Hotel did not prosper. Rio del Mar was slow to adjust to the post-war economy, again, according to Alan Collins, and it had lost its gleam as a fashionable resort community. Plus, and not insignificantly, the golf course and golf lodge were abandoned and thus no longer an attraction. In 1949, the Rio del Mar Hotel was declared bankrupt after 3 years of struggle by that investor group from 1946, and it closed its doors once again. In 1955, another investment group came along and called the Aptos Beach Golf Club Incorporated, to buy the hotel, golf course, and golf lodge. One of the four principals in that investment group was Joseph Alioto. Yes, the same Joe Alioto who became the mayor of San Francisco some years later. Work began to reconstruct the golf course, which had been abandoned for many years, as we said. A golf course designer named Bert Stamps did the redesign, and his other credits include the Las Vegas National Country Club in 1961, Camino Heights Golf Club in 1965, De La Viega Golf Club in 1970, which is right here in Santa Cruz, as you all know, and the Rancho Murrieta Golf Club in 1971. Here's the golf club interest from 1957 or thereabouts, and it reopened again as the Aptos Beach Golf Course. The back 9 opened in June and the front 9 opened in November. And the golf pro then was a man named Ed Holbrook. And a few photos from the inside. Here's the golf lodge fireplace from 1957. And here's a fellow apparently named Rocky Barnes. I didn't know him. I wasn't old enough to be served by Rocky Barnes, but apparently he was pretty well known. He was tending bar there at the golf lodge. And here's the 17th hole, which is today's 8th, around that 1957 time. And here's the golf lodge again, the lobby again from around 1957. So the Rio Del Mar Inn also reopened in 1957. That was the hotel up on the hill as the Aptos Beach Inn, but it regained its pre-war popularity. It closed again in 1961. Boy, open again, closed again, open again, closed again. And here it is opening again in 1962. It reopened again under a new lessee with big plans to become a racket club with tennis courts, swimming pool, and shopping arcade. But those additions were never built. And here's the lobby of the Aptos Beach Inn. And again, I mentioned it before, but that screen, that cast iron screen by the famous artist Otar that I mentioned earlier is the one that's on display in the Aptos History Museum. So here's from 1960. The Aptos Beach Inn was destroyed by fire during a PG&E banquet less than 4 months after its final reopening. John Hibble tells a story of how many of the guests that evening casually exited the burning building with drinks in hand. They watched the fire for a while, got bored soon enough, and soon made their way down to the Sea Breeze Tavern to continue the festivities. In 1963, the Aptos Seascape Corporation acquired the golf club and lodge for $562,000, and it was renamed the Aptos Seascape Golf Course. In 1964, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th holes were rearranged to accommodate the development of the Seascape Resort. And this rearrangement was done by famed golf course architect William P. Bell and Son. And they were a very well-known and prolific design team who built over 400 public and private and military golf courses, mainly in California, Oregon, Hawaii, and the Southwest. And you can see from the list on this slide that they designed many very famous and high-end golf courses, notably Torrey Pines, Bermuda Dunes, the Stanford Golf Course, Bel Air Riviera and LA Country Club, Palo Alto Muni. So they were a very high-end golf course design team that were involved with getting our golf course back in 1964. From 1967 to 1969, the Aptos Seascape Corporation created terrace lots at its Seascape residential development and upgraded the golf course facilities, including lowering the hill on the second fairway to allow players to see when those ahead were out of driving range. Here's the golf course as it was being remodeled. You can see some scaffolding there in 1968. They added the Seascape office to the golf lodge. They enlarged the dining room and remodeled the entrance to make it more attractive. As we can see on this next slide, here's the remodeled entrance from 1969. In 1975, The Golf Lodge was expanded again with an additional building to include the banquet facility, the locker rooms for men and women, a new pro shop, and the cart barn. And that building obviously still exists today, notably as the banquet room. From 1977 to 1978, the golf course was remodeled again, this time by Clark Glasson, and you can see a partial list of his other designs. I bet a lot of you have played at Deep Cliff over in Cupertino, or Sunken Gardens in Saratoga, or even the great little golf course up in Twain Harte. In 1979, the original dining room and lounge areas were completely refurbished. In that same year, Jr. became the head pro, and he held that position until 1986. Eddie is still around, I think, giving golf lessons, and I used to see him sometimes at a local coffee shop where I would sit and chat with him a bit. In 1986, the Seascape Corporation began to scale down their involvement in the area and sold the golf course property to American Golf Corporation for $5.5 million. At that time, American Golf owned or operated over 82 courses. About that time, Don Elser became the head pro, and his tenure lasted until 1997. Now, I didn't know this before, but after 1997, the golf course has not actually had a golf pro. In 1987, the clubhouse was closed for extensive remodeling and remodernization of the dining room and banquet facilities. The kitchen was completely rebuilt and updated with state-of-the-art equipment, and the clubhouse area was also re-landscaped. American Golf Corporation upgraded the golf course with a fully automated underground sprinkler system, and they redesigned and regraded the greens. They added strategic bunkers, and they repaved most of the cart paths. Here's another interesting footnote in the history of the area. Back in the 1960s, the late 1960s, a 101 room motel was first proposed for the golf course. It would have been in the area between today's driving range and the Ninth Fairway, with the entry access being from Sumner Avenue. And this proposal was approved by County Planning Commission in 1974. But a lengthy battle ensued against it by many locals, and this fight was led by our local historian, Alan Collins. Nonetheless, when the golf course property was sold to American Golf, the Seascape Corporation retained the right to seek a permit to build a motel on the proposed site, which would have been on American Golf Corporation land. But in 1989, the County Planning Commission made a final denial of Seascape Corporation's application, and that was the end of that. So we don't have a motel there, as you may have noticed. Next came more remodeling. In 1997 and 1998, American Golf spent another $1.7 million. The pro shop was moved upstairs to its current location, and the front and back nines were switched back to the original configuration, and it remains that way today. And even more significantly maybe, is the golf course name was changed to Seascape Golf Club. In 2018, American Golf sold the golf course to a local partnership led by Robert Redino and Mark Holcomb. As you probably know, Mr. Holcomb passed away this past November, but he certainly has a lasting legacy here in Aptos, not only here at the golf course, but also with his development and operation of the Seascape Resort, Seascape Village Shopping Center, and Palapa's Restaurant. And I did speak with Bob Redino recently. We had a very nice conversation, and he provided me with updated information. And I think it's just terrific that we have local ownership of our golf course. And I know Bob is dedicated to the area, and also is going to become a great supporter of our museum. The new ownership made significant additional investment in the golf course, including renovation of the main banquet room last year, which hasn't been able to be used, of course, yet because of the pandemic. And here's a view of the patio or the deck going off of the banquet room, with just a gorgeous view overlooking the golf course. I think that's the 9th green coming up there. And that would be the first hole going way off to the right behind those umbrellas. So what a great spot for a banquet. I'm really looking forward to the first time we can get to go there. Now, the new owners also just completed work on the driving range with new and improved irrigation and drainage, leveled out landing areas with new target greens, and a new tee line with new hitting bays. This new driving range actually opened just a couple of weeks ago. So that brings us up to date. And just to bring this in for a landing finally, and to quickly review the 5 names of a golf course that it's had over its history. 1925, it was the Aptos Beach Country Club. 1929, it became the Rio Del Mar Country Club. 1957, the Aptos Beach Golf Course. 1963, the Aptos Seascape Golf Course. And in 1998, the Seascape Golf Club. Oh, there's the view. I forgot to click to that slide. There's those new hitting bays on the tee line. So thanks again for your support. Thanks for supporting Zooming for History. Let's see if anybody has any questions. Bob Rodino, would you like to make any comments in particular? And anybody else, unmute yourself and just chime in.
All I can say is that I'm just humbled, and I feel like it's a responsibility to, after watching this history that I knew bits and pieces about, of course. My children were born on this golf course. I have my own history going back almost 40 years and a love for Rio Del Mar and Aptos that I could make my own story about. But I honestly, I'm just sitting here watching this, and it's just, it makes me at awe to know the responsibility to keep it in hands that will respect its history, its legacy, and what it's all about. I mean, it's just an amazing opportunity, and I wish Mark was here to have seen this. I hope his family is either watching or will see this. If they're not here now, I'll make sure they see it. And again, I see this more as a responsibility than anything else. I'm a businessman, but I know that when this opportunity came along, at my age, I said, well, I need this like I need a hole in my head. And some people thought buying a golf course, I got to be crazy. But I really felt at the time that if I didn't try this, the day would come when I see somebody else out there with their hands on it, then I think I would have more frustration that I didn't attempt it than the challenge that came along this last couple of years. And again, I'm just kind of at awe, and I appreciate this being done. I support our local community way more just than the golf course, but my goal is to keep the ride going. And the beauty of our area is just amazing. And some of the bits and pieces you brought to the table here are just double down on my feeling about that. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen who put this together. It might be perceived that somehow I had something to do with it. It's just a big coincidence that that was coming along at this moment in time, and the future ahead. I just look forward to it and thank everybody for what they've done.
Well, you're welcome, Bob. Thank you. Bob Wall is the one who, he's also from the committee that's been with the museum since day one. And he's the one that put me in touch with you. And you were kind enough to give me a phone call and have a nice chat with me and send me some of those slides there that I showed at the end. So we just are really grateful, and we thank you that we have local ownership. That's really significant.
Bob will tell you stories going back decades ago about him and I. Bob, you don't mind shooting off firecrackers on the 4th of July with our children out on the cul-de-sac, and then running when we saw the marshal coming. So Bob and I have our own personal stories about this wonderful piece of property.
Bob, you live on what? You live on the 15th hole?
I live on the point of in between the 14th green and the 15th tee box, right there on the point. I've been there for 3 decades.
Okay. And do you remember that tree out there that I was talking about?
I know the tree.
I've hit it more than a few times myself. Yeah.
I know every tree. When I came here, there were dozens of, as I'm sure you know, dozens of diseased pines that little by little just we lost. And it's amazing when I look at old pictures. When I look at those ones back in the 20s and 30s, I'm awestruck about every tree that's out there. Between you and I wish a few more of the ukes might go away, but that's beside the point. That's another story altogether.
I've got a chainsaw.
Okay, let's do it.
I'll meet you out there at midnight.
Maybe at midnight, I was gonna say.
Anybody else have a question?
I don't see any in the chat. so-
There's nothing in the chat boxes. So I guess we'll all head to the 19th hole.
All right.
Great job, Jim.
Thank you
Dick,
for a
and
great
Thanks so much,
presentation.
Bob.
Oh, hi,
Yeah.
Bob. Hi,
Yeah.
hi, Nancy. Oh,
Hi.
look at this. Wonderful, guys.
everybody,
Thank
for-
you so much. We're so far away from each other right now, aren't we, Bob? Nancy?
Yeah.
All
Just,
right.
just a wedge away.
Yep.
Okay, thanks everybody for
Thank
joining.
you, everybody.
Great job,
Thank
Dick. Yeah,
Good
thank
health.
you.
Good health
Bye.
to everybody, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you, John and Karen.
Bye-bye.
You just got back from Tahoe.